Who am I? You ever ask yourself that question? Who am I? You know, most of us don't really want to wrestle with that question, right? Because as long as we don't, we feel pretty safe. But that's what we're called to do. We're called to look beyond who we think we are, to see who we really are. You know, in our first reading, we hear God telling Isaiah, you're much more than you think you are. You're much more than a servant. I'll tell you who you are. You are a light to the nations, and I will bring that out in you. And in the second reading, we hear Paul. Paul is coming out and saying, here's who I think I am, right? And because you see, Paul had realized he wasn't who he thought he was when he was holding the cloaks while people were stoning St. Stephen. He realized that's not who I am. And so he's trying to tell people this is more of who I think I am, right? And in the psalm we hear, I don't know what we hear. I have trouble hearing the words when it's sung. But in the psalm we hear God saying he doesn't want Holocaust and sin offerings, right? Why is that? Well, you know, we can offer sacrifices a lot easier when it's not ourselves, when it's a pigeon or a calf or some grain that we burn. As long as it's not me that's being sacrificed, I'm good with that. And God's saying that's not enough. I want you. I want you for who you are. As long as we resist this sense of telling who we, really looking at who we are, we jump into stuff. And we'd much rather deal with a question like, what do I do? Right? Look, let's kind of get some stuff clear. I'm not a deacon. Deacon describes what I am called to do, serve. I'm not a father. What I do is try to take care of my kids, grandkids, shelter, safety, encouragement, love. I'm not a man. A man just describes my physical attributes. I can go on and on about what I am not. These are all titles. They're all things I do. And we all love wearing that because it gives us a sense of security. But it's not who we really are. We're someone so much more. And, in the gospel, we hear John's got this down cold, right? Because not in this gospel, but in another one, they asked, John, are you a prophet? And he said, no. Yet today we heard him prophesy. Because, see, prophecy is not so much about telling the future, but the truth of what is. And today we heard in the gospel him telling us the truth of who Jesus was. And he found out it's a lot more than my cousin, right? See, this is what we're called to do, is as long as we resist really looking into and trying to struggle with this question of who am I, right? We're gonna continue to place an inordinate amount of time and effort and energy into accumulating wealth and power and stature. Until we're willing to let go of that, we're going to continue to put people in boxes: men, women, black, white, prisoner, free person, immigrant, citizen. We're going to continue to do that. We'll even put ourselves in a box. And guess what? We'll also put God in a box. Why? Because it gives us a sense of control, a false sense of control. But when we recognize who we really are, who God calls us to be, it's so much more than any of that. And we look past all of the surface stuff, and we see others who they are. And until we deal with this, who we are, and struggle with it, and really spend some time on it, we have a hard time understanding what St. Augustine tells us when he says, become what you receive when we receive the Eucharist or a blessing. It'll be like water off a duck's back. Yeah, got it. But if we get that, right, we see that we can't continue to treat people the way we do. We can't continue to maintain the status quo. We can't continue to treat people like they don't matter or that they're not as good or whatever. We continue that until we can wrestle with, who am I really? Who did God create me to be? Now look, I don't want to make this too much of a downer, but it's really important. But if you can, right? If you can, spend some time on that this week, right? And don't be afraid. And sometimes people are afraid to go down that path because they're afraid what they might discover. No, if we do that, what we're going to discover is something much better than we can imagine, right? And look, God knows who we are. He can look past all of our vestments and titles and see who we really are. He knows it. And so he's going to be gentle with us, because what he wants more than anything else is for us to get in touch with love, with this pure love that is called God. And when we do, there ain't nothing sweeter. And he wants us to have that freedom to be who we are. Amen?